The Beartooth Highway, often called America's most beautiful roadway, winds its serpentine path through some of the most spectacular wilderness in the United States. Connecting the northeastern entrance of Yellowstone National Park with Red Lodge, Montana, the highway reaches elevations of nearly 11,000 feet, offering travelers breathtaking views of alpine plateaus, pristine lakes, and rugged peaks that seem to touch the very heavens. But on a misty morning in late May 2025, this iconic route would become the stage for an encounter that would challenge our understanding of the natural world and ignite a firestorm of controversy that would extend far beyond the boundaries of Yellowstone. David Nakamura, a 43-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle, had planned this trip for months. Having built his reputation on capturing intimate portraits of North America's most elusive predators, wolves in Yellowstone, mountain lions in the Rockies, and grizzlies in Alaska, David was no stranger to patience, perseverance, and the fickle nature of wildlife photography. But this expedition was different. After nearly 2 decades behind the lens, David felt he needed something truly special to reinvigorate his passion for his craft. The Beartooth Highway, with its dramatic changes in elevation and diverse ecosystems, offered endless possibilities. In a single day, a photographer could capture alpine wildflowers, snow-capped peaks, and the rich tapestry of wildlife that called this rugged wilderness home. David had a particular interest in photographing mountain goats negotiating the treacherous cliffs that gave the Beartooth Mountains their name. He had set out well before dawn, his SUV loaded with camera equipment, provisions, and camping gear for an extended stay in the backcountry. The forecast had called for clear skies, but as is often the case in the mountains, the weather had other plans. A thick mist had rolled in overnight, shrouding the landscape in an ethereal haze that transformed the familiar into the mysterious. As the first hints of daylight began to filter through the fog, David pulled into a small turnout near the 10,000-foot mark. The visibility was poor, perhaps 50 yards at best, but there was a haunting beauty to the landscape that appealed to his artistic sensibilities. Grabbing his primary camera, a top-of-the-line Canon with a telephoto lens that had cost more than his first car, David made his way to a rocky outcropping that offered a commanding view of a steep ravine below. For nearly an hour, David sat in contemplative silence, watching as the mist ebbed and flowed like an otherworldly tide, occasionally revealing glimpses of the dramatic landscape beyond. He had just begun to consider relocating to a lower elevation where the visibility might be better when a sound caught his attention. A deep, resonant vocalization unlike anything he had heard before. It wasn't the bugle of an elk or the growl of a bear. It was something altogether different, a low, rumbling call that seemed to reverberate through the very rocks beneath him. David's heart rate quickened as his professional instincts kicked in. Whatever had made that sound was close, perhaps just beyond the veil of mist that limited his vision. With practiced efficiency, he adjusted his camera settings, preparing for whatever might emerge from the fog. The sound came again, followed by a different vocalization, higher in pitch but with the same resonant quality, almost like a response to the first call. And then, through a momentary thinning of the mist, David saw them. At first, his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Approximately 75 yards down the slope, 3 figures moved through a small clearing in the pine forest. They were bipedal, moving with a smooth, rolling gait that was both fluid and powerful. The largest of the 3 stood at least 8 feet, tall, its massive frame covered in thick, dark hair. Beside it moved a slightly smaller figure, and between them, a juvenile, perhaps 4 feet in height. "Impossible," David whispered, his finger automatically pressing the shutter release. The sound of the camera's rapid-fire clicking seemed unnaturally loud in the mountain stillness. Through his lens, David could make out details that sent his mind reeling. The creature's proportions were all wrong for humans, incredibly broad. Shoulders, arms that hung down to their knees, and legs that were relatively short but powerfully muscled. Their heads sat directly on those massive shoulders with no discernible neck, and what he could see of their faces beneath heavy brow ridges showed wide, flat noses and deep-set eyes. A family of Sasquatch. The thought formed in David's mind with perfect clarity, though part of him rebelled against the impossibility of what he was witnessing. As a nature photographer, David prided himself on his scientific mindset and skepticism. He had always regarded Bigfoot stories as misidentifications at best, hoaxes at worst. But what moved through the mist before him defied any conventional explanation. For nearly 5 minutes, David documented the family group as they made their way across the slope, occasionally pausing to examine something on the ground or reach up into the trees with those long, powerful arms. Their movements were purposeful, intelligent, displaying a comfort and familiarity with the rugged terrain that spoke of intimate knowledge. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the mist thickened, enveloping the 3 figures and obscuring them from view. David remained frozen in position, camera at the ready, hoping for another glimpse. But when the fog briefly cleared again minutes later, the slope was empty. The family had vanished into the vastness of the Beartooth wilderness. With hands that trembled from both cold and adrenaline, David lowered his camera and tried to process what he had just witnessed. As a professional photographer, he knew the value of what might be on his memory card, potentially the clearest, most definitive images of Sasquatch ever captured. But he also understood the scrutiny, skepticism, and perhaps even ridicule that would follow should he make his sighting public. David spent several more hours at the site, hoping for the creature's return, but they did not reappear. As the day progressed, the mist began to lift, revealing the dramatic landscape in all its glory. But for David, the spectacular vistas held little interest compared to what he had glimpsed in the morning fog. That evening, in the privacy of his small tent pitched at a designated campsite several miles from the sighting location, David reviewed the images on his laptop. What he saw both thrilled and terrified him. While some shots were obscured by the mist, others were surprisingly clear, revealing details of the creatures that would be impossible to fake. The muscle definition visible beneath the hair, the steam of their breath in the cold mountain air, the natural interaction between the 3 beings, it all spoke to the authenticity of what he had captured. As he studied the images, David struggled with what to do next. As a wildlife photographer with a reputation for integrity, he felt a responsibility to share his discovery with the world. But he also understood that these images, if genuine, could lead to an invasion of curiosity seekers, potentially putting both the creatures and the fragile alpine ecosystem at risk. After a sleepless night of contemplation, David made his decision. He would report his sighting to the park authorities, sharing his evidence with scientists who could evaluate it properly before any public announcement was made. With this resolution, he packed up his camp at first light and headed for the Yellowstone northeast entrance, where he could speak with park rangers. The ranger station at the northeast entrance was a rustic log building that served as both an information center for visitors and an operational base for park personnel. As David pulled into the nearly empty parking lot shortly after 8 in the morning, he noticed several official vehicles, including 2 marked ranger trucks and what appeared to be a research vehicle for the park's wildlife division. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, David gathered his laptop and camera and made his way inside. The station was quiet, with just a few early visitors picking up maps and asking about trail conditions. Behind the main counter stood Ranger Michelle Carter, a veteran of the Park Service with over 15 years of experience. Her weathered face and alert eyes spoke of countless hours in the backcountry and a deep knowledge of Yellowstone's wilderness. "Good morning," she greeted David with a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with someone about a wildlife sighting," David replied, keeping his voice low. "Something unusual that I photographed yesterday on Beartooth Highway." Something in his tone must have conveyed the seriousness of his request, because Ranger Carter's expression shifted subtly. She studied his face for a moment before responding. May I ask the nature of this sighting? David hesitated, aware of the other visitors within earshot. I'd prefer to discuss it privately, if possible. It's potentially sensitive. Ranger Carter nodded, understanding in her eyes. Let me get Kevin Blackwolf. He's our lead wildlife biologist for the Northeast section. She reached for a radio, stepping slightly away from the counter as she made the call. Within minutes, a door at the back of the station opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s emerged. Kevin Blackwolf had the confident bearing of someone intimately familiar with the wilderness. His long black hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a ponytail, and his dark eyes held a sharp intelligence as he approached. I'm Kevin Blackwolf, he introduced himself, extending a hand to David. Michelle says you have something interesting to share with us? David. Nakamura, David replied, shaking the offered hand. I'm a wildlife photographer based in Seattle. And yes, I captured something yesterday that I think you should see. Kevin nodded to a door behind the counter. Let's talk in my office. The biologist's office was small but organized, with walls covered in wildlife maps, tracking charts, and spectacular photographs of Yellowstone's inhabitants. A large computer monitor sat on a desk cluttered with field journals and scientific papers. So, Mr. Nakamura, Kevin said as he settled behind his desk, gesturing for David to take the seat opposite. What did you see up on Beartooth that's got you so concerned? David took a deep breath. Before I show you, I want you to know that I'm approaching this as a scientist would. I've been a wildlife photographer for nearly 20 years. I know the difference between a bear, an elk, or a person in a costume. Kevin's expression remained neutral, but his interest was clearly piqued. Understood. Let's see what you've got. David opened his laptop, queued up the best of the images, and turned the screen toward the biologist. For several long moments, Kevin said nothing, his face revealing no emotion as he leaned forward, studying the photographs with intense concentration. He reached out, gesturing for permission to scroll through the sequence, which David granted, with a nod. After reviewing all 37 images in complete silence, Kevin finally leaned back in his chair. His expression was thoughtful, contemplative. You understand why I had to come to you with this, David said, breaking the silence. If these are what they appear to be, a family group, Kevin said quietly. Adult male, adult female, and a juvenile, based on the proportions and behavior patterns. He was stating it as fact, not question, which caught David by surprise. You believe they're genuine? David asked cautiously. Kevin fixed him with a penetrating gaze. Mr. Nakamura, I've been working in these mountains for over 30 years. I'm Lakota Sioux. My people have stories about the tall ones that go back countless generations. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. Let's just say your photographs don't come as a complete surprise to me. A surge of validation washed over David. He had expected skepticism, demands for proof, perhaps even accusations of fabrication. Instead, he found himself sitting across from someone who not only believed him, but seemed to have prior knowledge of the creature's existence. What happens now? David asked. Kevin's face grew serious. That depends on how many people know about this sighting besides the two of us. No one, David assured him. I came straight here. Good, Kevin nodded. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the closed door. You're not the first to see them in this region, especially not in recent months. We've had a significant increase in sightings since the wildfire in the northeast section last summer. Wildfire? David's photographer's mind immediately made the connection. It displaced them. That's our working theory, Kevin confirmed. The burn area was approximately 20,000 acres of remote backcountry. We believe it disrupted an established territory of at least one family group, possibly more. forcing them to range more widely and bringing them into areas with higher chances of human contact. David's mind was reeling with the implications. "How long have you known about them?" Before Kevin could answer, a sharp knock sounded at the door, and Ranger Carter poked her head in, her expression tense. "Kevin, we've got a situation developing up at Pebble Creek. Multiple visitors reporting a large animal sighting that matches the profile we've been monitoring. Thompson and Reyes are already en route." Kevin was on his feet immediately. "Tell them full protocol Delta. No sirens, no lights. I'm heading up there now." He turned to David, his expression deadly serious. "Mr. Nakamura, I need to deal with this situation. I'm going to ask you to stay right here until I return. Do not share those images with anyone. Do not upload them. Do not even mention your sighting to another soul. Do you understand?" The urgency in the biologist's voice was unmistakable. David nodded. "Completely. I'll wait right here." As Kevin rushed from the office, David found himself alone with the knowledge that what he had photographed was real. So real that the Park Service had established protocols for dealing with sightings. He stared at the images on his laptop screen, the reality of his discovery finally sinking in. He had documented a family of Sasquatch in their natural habitat, a scientific discovery of monumental proportions. Outside, he heard vehicles starting up, radios crackling with coded messages, and the unmistakable sound of an operation kicking into high gear. Somewhere up at Pebble Creek, approximately 15 miles from where he sat, the family he had photographed, or another like them, had been spotted again, and the rangers were in pursuit. The Pebble Creek area of Yellowstone's northeastern section is a place of breathtaking natural beauty. Nestled in the Absaroka Range, its meandering stream, verdant meadows, and thick stands of lodgepole pines create a picturesque setting that draws hikers and wildlife enthusiasts throughout the summer months. On this particular late May morning, the campground was only partially filled. The peak tourist season was still a few weeks away, but those early visitors would become unwitting participants in an unfolding drama that would challenge the boundaries between science, folklore, and official policy. Rangers Maria Reyes and Darren Thompson were the first park personnel to arrive at Pebble Creek in response to the reported sighting. Both were part of Yellowstone's Wildlife Response Team, a specialized unit trained to handle everything from aggressive bear encounters to injured animals on roadways. But today's call was different, coded as Protocol Delta, which both rangers knew referred to a very specific type of sighting. As they pulled their NPS truck into the campground's main loop, they immediately noticed the cluster of excited visitors gathered near Campsite 14. Maria, a former wildlife biologist with a decade of ranger experience, took the lead as they approached the group, her bearing calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Good morning, folks," she greeted the assembled campers, her voice steady and authoritative. "I'm Ranger Reyes, and this is Ranger Thompson. We understand there's been a wildlife sighting." The crowd erupted in overlapping accounts, but one voice rose above the others, a middle-aged man in expensive outdoor gear who introduced himself as Dr. James Wilson, a dentist from Minneapolis. "It was incredible," he insisted, his eyes wide with excitement. "My wife and I were hiking the Pebble Creek Trail about a mile upstream when we saw them crossing the meadow. 3 of them, a big one, a slightly smaller one, and what looked like a child. At first I thought they were bears walking upright, but they were moving too smoothly, too human-like." "But not human," his wife interjected. "They were covered in dark hair, and the large one must have been 8 feet tall at least. We watched them for nearly 5 minutes before they disappeared into the trees on the far side of the meadow." Other campers chimed in with their own accounts, a family that had glimpsed something large moving through the trees from their campsite, a solo hiker who claimed to have heard strange vocalizations, unlike any animal sounds she recognized. Ranger Thompson, a former Marine with a calm demeanor that belied his imposing physical presence, had already begun quietly establishing a perimeter, gently moving onlookers away from the trail access point and taking note of those who claimed first-hand sightings. Maria continued questioning the primary witnesses, focusing on details that might help confirm or refute the nature of what they had seen. "Did you happen to take any photos or videos?" she asked the Wilsons, maintaining a carefully neutral expression. Dr. Wilson nodded eagerly, fumbling for his smartphone. "I got some video, though they were pretty far away. About 200 yards, I'd estimate." He pulled up the footage and handed the phone to Maria. The video was shaky, clearly taken by someone in a state of excitement, but did indeed show 3 dark figures moving across a distant meadow. The footage was too far away and too unstable to make out clear details, but the gait and proportions were consistent with previous reported sightings. "May I send this to our wildlife division?" Maria asked, her tone making it sound like a routine request rather than the crucial evidence gathering it was. "Of course," Dr. Wilson agreed readily. "It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, we just saw Bigfoot, an entire family of them." Maria managed a professional smile while exchanging a quick glance with Darren. "We appreciate you sharing this with us, Dr. Wilson. Now, I need to ask all of you to please return to your campsites or vehicles. We're going to need to temporarily close this section of the trail while we investigate." "Are you going after them?" someone in the crowd asked eagerly. "We'll be conducting a standard wildlife assessment," Darren replied, using the carefully crafted language established in their protocol training. "For your safety, we ask that you remain in the designated campground area until further notice." As they were speaking, 2 more park vehicles arrived. A ranger truck containing Senior Ranger William Gardner and wildlife technician Sophia Chen, followed by Kevin Blackwolf's SUV. The arrival of additional personnel helped Maria and Darren begin the process of managing the growing crowd of curious campers. Kevin approached Maria directly, his expression grave. "Status?" he asked quietly. "Multiple consistent witnesses reporting a family group sighting approximately 1 mile up the Pebble Creek Trail," she reported efficiently. "The dentist has video. I've already sent it to your phone. Estimated sighting. Time was 45 minutes ago, and the subjects were reportedly heading east into the tree line beyond the upper meadow." Kevin nodded, quickly reviewing the video on his phone. "Gardner," he called to the senior ranger, "establish a 2-mile perimeter around the sighting location. No visitors beyond campsite boundaries until further notice. Site wildlife management. Operations if anyone asks." As Gardner moved to comply, Kevin turned back to Maria and Darren. "You 2 are with me. Sophia will coordinate from base camp here. Full field kit, 60-minute initial assessment." The 3 grabbed specialized backpacks from their vehicles, equipment assembled specifically for Protocol Delta operations. Within 10 minutes, they were making their way up the Pebble Creek Trail, moving quickly but quietly, their senses alert to any sign of the creature's passage. "This is the second confirmed sighting in less than 24 hours, Kevin said in a low voice as they hiked. "We've never had frequency like this before." "You think it's the same family group from Beartooth?" Darren asked. Kevin nodded grimly. "The photographer's images matched our existing documentation. Adult male approximately 8 feet tall, adult female around 7 feet, juvenile about 4 feet. Dark brown hair, classic morphology." Maria, who had been studying the ground ahead of them, suddenly raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. "We've got tracks," she said quietly, pointing to an area of soft soil near the trail's edge. The 3 rangers crouched to examine the impressions. They were unmistakable, enormous footprints, roughly 16 inches in length, with 5 distinct toes and a mid-tarsal break that distinguished them from human tracks. Beside them were smaller but similarly shaped prints. "Recent," Kevin observed, gently touching the edge of one impression. "The soil is still crumbling. They came this way within the last hour." He stood, scanning the surrounding forest. "They're moving east, further into the backcountry." "Trying to get away from human contact?" Maria suggested. Kevin's expression darkened. That would be the usual pattern, but they're not following it. They crossed an open meadow in daylight, within view of a popular trail. That's unprecedented behavior. Desperation? Darren suggested, adjusting his backpack. If the wildfire really did displace them, possibly, Kevin acknowledged. Or something else is driving them to take risks they normally wouldn't. Either way, we need to locate them and assess the situation before some trigger-happy visitor or overzealous cryptid hunter does. They continued along the trail until they reached the meadow where the sighting had occurred. It was a beautiful alpine clearing, dotted with early summer wildflowers and surrounded by dense forest. The rangers spread out, searching for additional signs of the creature's passage. It was Darren who found the next significant evidence: a tuft of dark hair caught on a branch at the edge of the meadow, approximately 7 feet above the ground. Kevin carefully collected it in a sealed evidence bag, though he already knew what analysis would reveal. The hair would be primate in origin, but not match any known species. They went into these trees, Maria called from the eastern edge of the meadow. More tracks were visible where the creatures had entered the forest, along with broken branches and disturbed vegetation that created a visible trail even a novice tracker could follow. Kevin consulted his GPS unit, marking their location and studying the terrain ahead. The drainage leads up toward the Absaroka High Country, he noted. If they maintain this heading, they'll be in some of the most remote wilderness in the park within a few hours. Should we continue pursuit? Maria asked, her expression conflicted. As a wildlife biologist by training, the opportunity to study such creatures in their natural habitat was the professional opportunity of a lifetime. But she also understood the ethical complexities of pursuing beings that showed clear signs of intelligence and an apparent desire for privacy. Kevin checked his watch, considering their options. We'll continue for another 30 minutes. If we don't make contact, we'll pull back and implement Phase 2 monitoring. He tapped his radio. Black Wolf to base. We've confirmed sign and continuing east along the drainage. Request aerial surveillance. Package for deployment at coordinates to follow. Back at the Pebble Creek campground, Sophia Chen was managing a challenging situation. News of the sighting had spread rapidly among the campers, and additional visitors were arriving from other areas of the park, drawn by excited phone calls and text messages from friends who had witnessed the initial commotion. Sophia, though only in her second year as a wildlife technician, had a natural talent for public relations. She had established an impromptu information station at the campground entrance, where she provided carefully crafted updates that acknowledged a wildlife management operation without confirming the specific nature of the animals involved. We're currently tracking what may be an unusual bear family, she told the growing crowd, sticking to the cover story established in the Protocol Delta guidelines. For your safety, certain trails are temporarily closed. We appreciate your cooperation, and will provide updates as soon as possible. Most visitors accepted this explanation, but a few remained skeptical. Among them was Trevor Jenkins, a self-described cryptid researcher who had been camping at Slough Creek, 10 miles away, when he'd received a text from a friend about the excitement at Pebble Creek. Bears don't walk on 2 legs for extended periods, he challenged Sophia, his voice loud enough to draw attention from other campers. And they don't travel in family units that include individuals of different sizes matching the classic Sasquatch morphology. Sophia maintained her professional composure. Sir, I understand your interest, but I can only share the information I've been authorized to provide. If you'd like to submit a formal inquiry, I'd be happy to— This is a cover-up, Jenkins interrupted, pulling out his phone and beginning to record. The public has a right to know if there's been a legitimate Bigfoot sighting in a national park. These are public lands. The confrontation was beginning to attract attention when Senior Ranger Gardner intervened, his weathered face set in stern lines beneath his flat-brimmed hat. Mr. Jenkins, he said, his deep voice carrying natural authority. I understand your enthusiasm, but you're disrupting an official wildlife operation. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your vehicle or campsite immediately." Jenkins puffed up, prepared to argue, but something in Gardner's steady gaze made him reconsider. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing down but clearly unhappy. "People deserve to know the truth." As Jenkins retreated, Gardner turned to Sophia. "Good job keeping your cool," he said quietly. "But we've got a problem. Someone posted about the sighting on social media, and it's gaining traction. We've got reporters from Bozeman and Cody calling the main office, and there's already a hashtag trending, and Yellowstone Bigfoot." Sophia's eyes widened. "That's going to complicate things." Gardner nodded grimly. "Park superintendent is calling. An emergency meeting. Kevin needs to get back as soon as possible. The situation just went from wildlife management to full-blown PR crisis." Meanwhile, deep in the forest east of Pebble Creek, Kevin, Maria, and Darren were following the increasingly clear trail left by the Sasquatch family. The creatures, seemingly no longer concerned with concealing their passage, had left broken branches, disturbed ground cover, and occasional footprints that allowed the rangers to move quickly. "They're in a hurry," Darren observed, noting how the stride length in the visible tracks had increased. "But not running in panic," Maria added. "These are deliberate movements. They know where they're going." Kevin, who had been scanning the forest ahead with binoculars, suddenly froze. "Movement, 2:00, approximately 100 yards, he whispered, slowly lowering the binoculars and gesturing for the others to remain still. Through a gap in the trees, they could just make out a large, dark figure moving with fluid grace through the forest. It paused momentarily, seeming to check on something behind it, then continued forward and out of their line of sight. "That's the female," Kevin said softly. "The male is probably ranging ahead with the juvenile kept between them for protection. Classic primate family movement pattern." "Should we try to close the distance?" Darren asked, his hand instinctively checking the tranquilizer gun holstered at his hip, a precaution they carried on all Protocol Delta operations, though there had never been a documented case of Sasquatch aggression toward humans. Kevin considered briefly before shaking his head. "No, we've confirmed it's the same family group and they're moving away from populated areas. That's enough for now." He reached for his radio. "Black Wolf to base. Visual confirmation obtained. Subjects continuing east toward Absaroka Wilderness. We're implementing Phase 2 and returning to base." Phase 2 of Protocol Delta involved remote monitoring, trail cameras placed along likely travel routes, occasional aerial surveillance using drones equipped with thermal imaging, and quiet. Alerts to backcountry rangers to report any unusual signs or sounds. It was a system designed to track the creature's movements while minimizing direct human contact. As they prepared to head back, Maria noticed something at the base of a large pine tree. "Kevin, you should see this," she called softly. Beneath, the tree was a small pile of freshly picked huckleberries, arranged in a deliberate pattern that could not have been accidental. Beside it was a smooth riverstone that was clearly out of place in the forest environment. "Is that—" Darren began, his voice trailing off in disbelief. "A gift," Kevin confirmed, his expression somber. "Or possibly a message. We've documented this behavior before, though rarely." Maria looked from the arranged berries to Kevin's face. "You're saying they know we're following them? That they're intelligent enough to communicate intentionally?" Kevin met her gaze steadily. "What I'm saying, Ranger Reyes, is that we're not tracking animals. We're tracking people. A different kind of people than you and me, but people nonetheless." The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that extended far, beyond wildlife management protocols or scientific discovery. If what Kevin was suggesting was true, if the creatures they were pursuing possessed a level of intelligence and culture that placed them in the category of people rather than wildlife, then the ethical and legal frameworks governing their work would need to be fundamentally reconsidered. "We need to get back," Kevin said finally, his voice returning to its professional cadence. The situation at the campground will need management, and I suspect the superintendent is going to want a full briefing. As they made their way back toward Pebble Creek, following their own trail through the forest, Maria found herself looking back repeatedly, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest, which had seemed so familiar and comprehensible that morning, now felt filled with new mystery and possibility. What she didn't know, what none of the rangers yet realized, was that the day's events had set in motion a chain reaction that would soon escalate beyond their ability to control. The Sasquatch family was moving with purpose toward the deep wilderness of the Absaroka Range, but they were not simply fleeing human contact. They were responding to something, a call or a threat that had disrupted their normal patterns of behavior and driven them to take unprecedented risks. And as news of the sightings spread beyond the boundaries of Yellowstone, others were mobilizing. Scientists and skeptics, true believers and opportunists, all converging on the park with their own agendas and expectations. The chase had only just begun, and its ultimate destination remained hidden in the mist-shrouded peaks of the Absaroka wilderness. Back at the Pebble Creek campground, Senior Ranger Gardner received a call on his radio that made his weathered face grow pale. "Understood," he responded tersely, implementing Protocol Echo immediately. Sophia looked at him questioningly as he ended the transmission. "We've got a situation," Gardner explained grimly. Two men in tactical gear were just spotted entering the backcountry near Tower Junction. They were carrying what appeared to be high-powered rifles with night vision scopes. "Hunters?" Sophia asked, though she already suspected the answer. Gardner's expression was grim. The witness reported overhearing them discussing a $5,000 bounty for confirmed Bigfoot DNA. "They're not here for the scenery." The peaceful spring day in Yellowstone had taken yet another dark turn. What had begun as an extraordinary wildlife sighting was rapidly evolving into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Not just for the Sasquatch family moving through the wilderness, but for everyone involved in their pursuit. The Absaroka Range forms the rugged eastern boundary of Yellowstone National Park, a vast wilderness of jagged peaks, deep valleys, and dense forests rarely visited by the average tourist. As the sun began to set on what had already been an extraordinary day, this remote landscape became the stage for a confrontation that would challenge the ethical boundaries of conservation, science, and human curiosity. Kevin Blackwolf's emergency briefing with Yellowstone Superintendent Elaine Marshall had been tense but productive. A 25-year veteran of the National Park Service with a no-nonsense approach to management, Marshall had been one of the few high-ranking officials brought into the circle of trust when Protocol Delta was first established 5 years earlier. "So, we have confirmed sightings, photographic evidence that can't be easily dismissed, and a social media wildfire that's bringing every Bigfoot enthusiast in the country to our doorstep," she summarized, pacing the length of her office at park headquarters. "And now we've got armed civilians heading into the backcountry, apparently intent on collecting specimens. Have I missed anything?" "The family group appears to be moving with unusual purpose," Kevin added. "Their behavior suggests they're responding to something specific, not just fleeing human contact randomly." Marshall stopped pacing and fixed Kevin with an appraising look. "You've studied these beings longer than anyone. What's your assessment?" Kevin chose his words carefully. The wildfire last summer disrupted established territories and forced at least 2 family groups to relocate. We've been tracking their movements through the winter, and until recently, they'd been settling into new ranges in the most remote sections of the park. This sudden movement, this willingness to risk exposure, it's unprecedented. "Could they be responding to the increased human presence?" Marshall asked. Kevin shook his head. "I think it's the opposite. Something is driving them toward a specific location, and they're willing to risk human contact to get there." He hesitated before adding, "And based on what we found in the forest, the arranged berries and stone, I believe they're aware of Our involvement. They're intelligent enough to recognize that we're different from the hunters. Marshall nodded slowly, absorbing this information. Recommendations? A three-part approach, Kevin replied without hesitation. First, we need to intercept these armed individuals before they can harm the Sasquatch family. Second, we continue monitoring the family's movements to determine their destination. And third, we get ahead of the media narrative with a controlled release of information. Marshall's eyebrows shot up at the third point. You want to go public after decades of secrecy? Partial disclosure, Kevin clarified. Acknowledge that we're investigating unusual wildlife sightings without confirming species identification. It gives us cover for the increased ranger presence in the backcountry and helps manage public expectations. The superintendent considered this for a long moment before nodding decisively. Make it happen. I'll coordinate with Regional Office and Department of Interior. You focus on finding those hunters and protecting our visitors. As Kevin left the headquarters building, the enormity of what was unfolding weighed heavily on him. For 5 years, he had been part of a small, secret contingent within the National Park Service, dedicated to monitoring and protecting the beings that most people dismissed as legend. They had documented family groups in Yellowstone, Glacier, and Olympic National Parks, quietly building a scientific understanding of a species that officially didn't exist. Now, that carefully maintained secrecy was unraveling, and the consequences could be dire, not just for the Sasquatch family currently moving through the Absaroka wilderness, but for the entire species and its future relationship with humanity. As twilight deepened into night, 2 separate teams made their way into the backcountry of Yellowstone's northeastern section. The first, led by Kevin Blackwolf and including Rangers Reyes and Thompson, moved silently along game trails, their progress aided by night vision equipment and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. The second team, consisting of Marcus Voss and Tyler Rourke, followed a more direct but less stealthy approach, using headlamps and GPS coordinates obtained from online forums where the day's sightings had been discussed in fevered detail. Voss and Rourke were not typical hunters. Both were former military. Voss had served as a Marine sniper in Afghanistan, while Rourke had been Army Special Forces. After their service, they had found civilian life unsatisfying and had gravitated toward high-paying security contracts, and occasionally, less legal ventures that made use of their specialized skills. $5,000 is a low-ball offer, Voss remarked as they hiked. His voice kept low despite the seeming emptiness of the forest around them. If we get actual DNA samples, blood, tissue, whatever, we could auction them to the highest bidder. Research facilities would pay millions for confirmed Sasquatch specimens. Let's focus on finding the things first, Rourke replied, checking the tablet he carried, which displayed thermal imaging from a small drone hovering 200 feet above the forest canopy. According to the forum, they were heading east along this drainage. If they maintain that heading, he traced a line on the screen. They'll hit this valley within the next few hours. What neither man realized was that their conversation was being monitored. Ranger Thompson, who had circled ahead to establish a covert observation position, had deployed a small directional microphone that allowed the ranger team to track both the hunters' movements and their intentions. They're planning an ambush, Darren reported via radio, his voice tight with controlled anger. They're going to set up at the valley junction and wait. Kevin acknowledged the information grimly. The situation was evolving from wildlife protection to potential homicide prevention. If these men truly believed they were hunting animals, that was one legal issue. But if they understood, as Kevin did, that Sasquatch were intelligent, tool-using beings with complex social structures, essentially people, then their actions crossed into far darker territory. Change of plans, Kevin decided. We intercept the hunters first, then locate the family. Maria, circle north and come down the ridge above the valley entrance. Darren, maintain your position. I'll approach from the south. Standard non-lethal. Equipment only. As the Rangers moved into position, the Sasquatch family continued their purposeful journey through the darkness. Their night vision, far superior to any humans, allowed them to move with confidence through the forest. The massive male led the way, occasionally making low vocalizations that seemed to encourage or direct the female and juvenile following. Behind, they traveled with a fluid grace that belied their size, their feet leaving surprisingly little sign of their passage when they chose to move quietly. But tonight, stealth was secondary to speed. Something called them eastward, something important enough to risk the dangerous proximity to the two legs and their strange devices. The adult female carried a small pouch woven from plant fibers, occasionally reaching in to touch its contents as if for reassurance. The juvenile, despite the urgency of their journey, displayed the curiosity typical of young primates, sometimes pausing to examine interesting fungi or insects before being gently urged onward by its mother. By midnight, the hunters had reached their chosen ambush point, a narrow passage between two ridges where the valley constricted before opening into a broader meadow. Voss set up his rifle on a fallen log, attaching a sophisticated night vision scope and checking the wind direction. According to the thermal imaging, we've got 3 heat signatures moving this way, Rourke reported, studying his tablet. 1 large, 1 medium, 1 small, exactly matching the descriptions from the campground sightings. Range? Voss asked, making minute adjustments to his scope. About 1 click out, moving steadily. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they reach the Narrows. Voss nodded, satisfied. Perfect. I'll take the large one first, likely the male. You be ready with the tranquilizer for the other 2. Remember, the client wants specimens alive if possible, but DNA samples at minimum. Neither man noticed the subtle movements in the darkness around them as the rangers took up strategic positions, silently communicating through hand signals and text messages rather than radio transmissions that might alert their targets. Kevin, concealed behind a large boulder 30 yards from the hunters, assessed the situation with growing concern. The rifle Voss had assembled was a high-powered model capable of bringing down large game at significant distances. If allowed to fire, it would almost certainly be lethal. The legal complexities were enormous. Technically, the men could claim they were hunting an unclassified animal in self-defense, potentially avoiding serious charges even if they killed a Sasquatch. But Kevin knew what Maria and Darren also understood. They weren't just protecting wildlife. They were preventing what amounted to murder. In position, Maria texted from her location on the ridge above. Ready, came Darren's response. Kevin was about to give the signal to move when a deep, resonant call echoed through the valley, a sound so powerful it seemed to vibrate the very air. It was answered immediately by another call, higher in pitch, but with the same haunting quality, coming from much closer to their position. "That's them!" Rourke hissed excitedly. "They're communicating!" Voss settled behind his rifle, peering through the scope. "I've got movement at the tree line. 300 yards and closing." Kevin knew it was time to act. He raised his hand, prepared to give the signal that would launch the ranger's intervention, when another sound cut through the night. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly from the west. In the meadow beyond the Narrows, floodlights suddenly illuminated the area, sweeping across the forest edge where the Sasquatch family had been about to emerge. The helicopter, not a Park Service vehicle but a black unmarked craft, hovered low over the trees, its searchlight creating harsh shadows across the landscape. "What the hell?" Voss exclaimed, momentarily distracted from his target. The distraction was all the rangers needed. Moving with coordinated precision, they converged on the hunters. Maria rappelled swiftly down from her ridgetop position, while Darren emerged from the shadows to the east. Kevin approached directly, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "Federal officers, lower your weapons immediately." The hunters reacted with professional efficiency despite their surprise. Rourke dropped to a defensive crouch, drawing a sidearm, while Voss swung his rifle toward the new threat. "Drop it!" Maria commanded, her own weapon, a non-lethal but painful taser, aimed squarely at Rourke. National Park Service, you are in violation of multiple federal statutes. For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation might explode into violence. Then, acknowledging the tactical disadvantage, Voss slowly lowered his rifle. We're licensed hunters, he stated flatly. This is public land. You're trespassing in a closed area of a national park with illegal weapons, Kevin countered, keeping his voice level despite his anger. And you're hunting a protected species. Protected? Rourke scoffed. Bigfoot isn't even officially recognized, let alone protected. That's where you're wrong, Kevin replied, but we can discuss the legal details back at headquarters. As Darren moved to secure the hunter's weapons, the situation in the meadow was evolving rapidly. The helicopter had landed, and several figures in dark clothing were emerging, carrying what appeared to be capture equipment, large nets, restraint devices, and tranquilizer rifles. We've got another problem, Maria reported, gesturing toward the meadow. Unauthorized aircraft and personnel. Kevin's expression darkened. The complexity of the situation had just increased exponentially. Who were these newcomers? Private researchers? Military? Some shadowy government agency operating outside normal channels? Before he could formulate a response, the Sasquatch family emerged from the forest. Not into the meadow where the helicopter waited, but into the narrows where the rangers and captured hunters stood. For a breathtaking moment, humans and Sasquatch regarded each other across a distance of less than 50 yards. The male stood at the fore, its massive frame outlined against the night sky. In the ambient light from the helicopter's searchlight, its features were clearly visible, a face that seemed both alien and eerily familiar, with deep-set eyes that reflected an intelligence that was impossible to deny. Behind it, the female placed a protective arm around the juvenile, which peered out with unmistakable curiosity. "My God," Maria whispered, momentarily forgetting her professional detachment. Even the hunters seemed awed by the presence before them. Voss, despite his former intention to shoot the creatures, stared with an expression that bordered on reverence. The moment of mutual observation lasted only seconds before the male Sasquatch made a gesture with its hand, a clear, deliberate movement that seemed to communicate understanding and acknowledgement. Then, with surprising grace for beings of such size, the family melted back into the forest, heading north away from both the rangers and the helicopter crew. We need to follow them, Kevin decided instantly. Maria, take these two back to headquarters for processing. Darren, you're with me, and call for backup to deal with our uninvited guests in the meadow. As Maria began the process of formally arresting the hunters, Kevin and Darren moved swiftly after the retreating Sasquatch family. Behind them, they could hear voices from the meadow, commands being shouted, equipment being moved, the helicopter powering down. Whoever these people were, they were setting up for a sustained operation. The chase through the night forest was unlike anything either ranger had experienced. The Sasquatch moved with incredible speed and agility despite their size, navigating the difficult terrain as if born to it, which, Kevin reflected, they had been. Their species had likely evolved in these mountains, developing a relationship with the landscape that went beyond mere adaptation to true symbiosis. After nearly an hour of pursuit, Kevin and Darren found themselves approaching a series of limestone caves set into a steep hillside. The Sasquatch tracks led directly toward the largest opening, a yawning black mouth in the pale rock face. They went inside, Darren noted, examining the disturbed earth at the cave entrance. Should we follow? Kevin considered their options. Protocol dictated maintaining observation from a distance, avoiding direct contact whenever possible. But the unusual circumstances, armed hunters, mysterious helicopter crews, and the Sasquatch family's aberrant behavior suggested that normal protocols might be insufficient. We follow, he decided. But we maintain a respectful distance. Remember, These aren't animals we're tracking. They're people of a different kind. Activating their headlamps on the lowest setting, the two rangers entered the cave. The passage narrowed quickly before opening into a larger chamber where the ceiling rose to nearly 15 feet. The air was cool and damp, carrying the mineral scent of underground water and something else, a musky, organic odor that Kevin recognized as the distinctive scent of Sasquatch. They moved cautiously through the chamber, following a clear trail of footprints in the soft cave floor. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper into the hillside, occasionally branching into side tunnels that the rangers marked with small, reflective tags to ensure they could find their way back. After nearly 20 minutes of careful progress, they began to hear sounds echoing through the cave system. The low, rumbling vocalizations they had heard earlier, but now accompanied by other noises. The soft clacking of stone against stone, the rustle of movement, and something that sounded almost like singing. A rhythmic, melodic series of calls that rose and fell in patterns too complex to be random. "There's more than just the three of them," Darren whispered, his voice barely audible. Kevin nodded. They were approaching something significant, perhaps a gathering of multiple family groups, maybe even a temporary settlement. The implications were staggering. The passage widened suddenly, opening into a vast underground chamber illuminated by a soft, diffuse light that seemed to emanate from bioluminescent fungi growing on the walls and ceiling. The sight that greeted the rangers stopped them in their tracks, their bodies frozen in awe at the threshold of discovery. The chamber was occupied by at least 20 Sasquatch of various sizes and ages. Some sat in groups, working with what appeared to be simple tools, shaping wood, weaving plant fibers, or arranging collections of stones in patterns that suggested meaning beyond mere decoration. Others tended to what looked like food preparation areas, where various plants and fungi were being sorted and processed. In the center of the chamber stood a circle of the largest adults, including the male they had been following. The female, from the same family group, approached this circle, presenting the pouch she had carried throughout their journey. From it, she carefully withdrew a crystal-like stone that caught the bioluminescent light and fractured it into rainbow patterns that danced across the cave walls. "It's a council," Kevin breathed, his voice filled with wonder. "They've gathered to make decisions." As if in response to his whispered observation, several of the Sasquatch turned toward the tunnel entrance where the rangers stood. There was no aggression in their movements, only a calm awareness of the human's presence. The large male they had followed from Pebble Creek approached deliberately, stopping about 10 feet away. For a long moment, Sasquatch and human regarded each other in silence. Then, with movements of surprising delicacy for hands so large, the male reached into a pouch similar to the one the female had carried. From it, he withdrew two small objects, which he carefully placed on the cave floor before retreating several steps. Kevin and Darren exchanged a glance before Kevin slowly moved forward to examine the offered items. They were two intricately carved figures, one depicting a Sasquatch, the other a human ranger, complete with hat and uniform details. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, revealing not just technical skill, but artistic sensibility and acute observational powers. "It's a message," Kevin said softly. "An acknowledgement. They know who we are and why we're here." The male Sasquatch made a series of gestures, pointing first to the carvings, then to Kevin and Darren, and finally to the larger group gathered around the crystal. The meaning, while not expressed in words, was nevertheless clear. An invitation to witness. Kevin straightened, making his decision. With deliberate movements, he removed his ranger hat and placed it beside the carvings, a gesture of respect and acceptance. Then he and Darren followed as the Sasquatch led them deeper into the chamber toward the council circle. What transpired over the next hours would forever change their understanding of these beings. Through a combination of gestures, drawings, in the soft cave floor, and the presentation of various objects, the Sasquatch communicated a complex narrative. They showed how the wildfire had disrupted not just their territories, but their traditional gathering places. They demonstrated how human encroachment, roads, campgrounds, hiking trails, had fragmented their range and complicated their seasonal movements. And most significantly, they revealed why they had been willing to risk exposure by traveling through areas frequented by humans. This cave system, with its council chamber, was their most sacred gathering place, used for generations to make important collective decisions. The crystal the female had carried was some kind of ceremonial object, passed between family groups and brought to council meetings. As dawn approached, Kevin and Darren reluctantly prepared to leave. The experience had been profound, a privilege few humans had ever known. The Sasquatch male who had first approached them escorted them back to the cave entrance, where morning light now illuminated the forest beyond. Before they departed, Kevin turned to the Sasquatch and spoke, knowing that while the words themselves might not be understood, the intention behind them would be. "We will protect this place," he promised, "and we will protect your people." The Sasquatch regarded him solemnly before making a gesture that needed no interpretation, a hand placed over the heart, then extended toward the rangers. Gratitude, trust, connection. As Kevin and Darren made their way back through the forest, toward the ranger station, the events of the night took on an almost dreamlike quality. But the carved figures, carefully wrapped and stored in Kevin's pack, were tangible evidence of the extraordinary encounter. "What happens now?" Darren asked as they hiked. "With the hunters, the helicopter people, the public attention?" Kevin considered the question deeply before answering. "Now we face the most challenging conservation effort in human history. We're not just protecting a species or an ecosystem. We're protecting a people's right to exist on their own terms, in their own way." "Can we do that?" Darren pressed. "Once the world knows they exist?" "The world doesn't need to know everything," Kevin replied. "Not yet. They've survived alongside us for thousands of years by remaining just beyond the edge of our awareness. Our job is to help them maintain that balance for as long as they choose to." As they emerged from the forest near the ranger station, they could see the aftermath of the night's events unfolding. The hunter's vehicle was being impounded, and several official SUVs bearing Department of Interior insignia had arrived. Superintendent Marshall stood on the station's porch, deep in conversation with individuals who appeared to be federal officials. "Looks like the situation got kicked upstairs," Darren observed. Kevin nodded. That was inevitable, but it might not be a bad thing. "We need allies with authority if we're going to establish effective protections." Marshall spotted them approaching and excused herself from the conversation, meeting them halfway across the parking area. "You look like you've had quite a night," she observed, taking in their exhausted but exhilarated expressions. "You could say that," Kevin acknowledged. "We've made contact." The superintendent's eyes widened. "Intentional contact? That's unprecedented." "So is everything about this situation," Kevin replied. "But I believe it's a turning point, an opportunity to establish a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect and recognition." Marshall glanced back at the officials waiting on the porch. "The department has assembled a task force. Scientists, legal experts, policy advisors. They want a full briefing." "I'll give them one," Kevin assured her. "But first, I need your commitment. Whatever policies we develop, whatever protections we put in place, they must be guided by one fundamental principle. These beings have the right to determine their own destiny. They are not research subjects, curiosities, or resources to be managed. They are people." Marshall studied him for a long moment before nodding decisively. "I've been managing wildlife and wilderness for 25 years, she said. "But this is something entirely different. I understand that now." She straightened, her expression resolute. "You have my commitment. Now let's go make our case to the people who can help us keep it." As they walked toward the station, Kevin felt the weight of the carved figures in his pack. A gift, a message, a trust. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be those who sought to exploit, to capture, to control. But there would also be allies, people like Marshall, like Maria and Darren, like the growing community of scientists and officials who understood the profound importance of what they had discovered. The Sasquatch had survived alongside human civilization for millennia, maintaining their privacy and independence through a delicate balance of avoidance and adaptation. Now, as that balance faced unprecedented challenges, they had taken the extraordinary step of reaching out, not in surrender, but in cooperation. It was, Kevin realized, the greatest honor of his life to serve as a bridge between these two branches of the great family of intelligent beings that shared this planet. And while the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. The world had changed irreversibly in the space of a single day and night. The story of the Sasquatch family spotted near Yellowstone would not end with a capture or a definitive scientific classification. It would continue, evolving into something far more complex and meaningful, a new chapter in the human relationship with the natural world and with the other intelligent beings with whom we share it. And somewhere in the wilderness of the Absaroka Range, in caves illuminated by the gentle glow of bioluminescent fungi, the Council of the Sasquatch continued their ancient traditions, secure in the knowledge that among the humans who now knew of their existence, they had found not just observers or protectors, but something that had been rare throughout their long history of coexistence. They had found allies.